So think about what you're doing right now. You are probably, I don't know, maybe sitting in traffic or you've got your headphones on while you're working, listening to this very audio.
Right, yeah. Or doing the dishes. Yeah.
Exactly. And earlier today, you were probably humming along to some 3-minute pop song in the car. But here's the crazy thing. That 3-minute song wasn't designed by some artist looking for the perfect, artistic runtime.
No, not at all.
It was literally structurally engineered by mid-century radio executives. Like, they just needed a highly predictable unit of audio so they could neatly separate their toothpaste commercials inside this incredibly rigid broadcasting grid.
It is honestly a pretty sobering realization, because when you discover that the boundaries of our most beloved art forms were largely dictated by the logistical plumbing of early broadcast technology, it really shifts your perspective.
It completely changes how you hear everything. And that is exactly the kind of invisible architecture we are tearing down the walls to look at today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me back.
Always great to have you. So we are operating off a single, incredibly comprehensive source today. It's a 2026 column from MMR, and it's titled, Deciphering the Decline and Revival of Radio Culture Through Music Culture and Economic Zones.
It's quite a mouthful of a title, but it's a fascinating read.
It really is. And our mission for you on this deep dive is to trace the hidden evolution of audio media. We want to reveal how this medium didn't just change, like how we listen to music. It fundamentally reshaped what music actually is.
And crucially, how a completely new economic model one that is based entirely on trust has essentially resurrected the audio medium for the modern era.
Right, because to really capture what this column is saying, I think we have to abandon the idea of audio as this fixed, static object.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
It's much more useful to think of it like a fluid. It's like water. Whenever a new technology builds a new container, the water doesn't die. It just, changes shape to fill whatever vessel it gets poured into.
That's a perfect analogy, because the author of the column paints a picture of audio history that really challenges the standard narrative we've all been taught.
The narrative that video killed the radio star, basically.
Exactly. The story we usually hear is that radio suffered this slow, tragic death in the face of visual media, screens, and the internet. But the text frames it as a continuous, rather brilliant adaptation. But to understand the water today, we have to look at the very first container.
Which means we need to correct a pretty massive historical misconception about the 1920s, right? Because we all default to this sepia-toned image of families gathered around a massive wooden radio cabinet listening to some big band.
Right, or a crooner. We inherently associate the genesis of radio with music.
But that wasn't the point at all.
Not even close. Looking at the actual historical bandwidth allocation and the initial intent of those early engineers' radio was simply not invented to distribute music.
It was all about the spoken word. Like, if you look at the primary utility of those early networks, they were focused on broadcasting crop reports, evening news bulletins.
Political speeches, dramatic readings, yeah.
Right. They were just trying to solve the problem of getting critical information across vast geographical distances instantly. Music was almost an afterthought. It was basically filler.
It was a happy accident.
Yeah.
The properties of a song just happened to fit the technological constraints of early broadcast perfectly.
Wait, what do you mean by properties of a song?
Well, think about the mechanics of a piece of music from a broadcaster's perspective in the 1920s. First off, it transcends language.
Oh, interesting. So you don't need to speak English to enjoy it.
Exactly. A single broadcast from a powerful tower in Chicago could reach diverse, geographically scattered immigrant populations all across the Midwest, and they didn't need a translator.
That makes so much sense.
And second, it is highly repeatable. You cannot broadcast the same 10-minute news bulletin about a local election 5 times a day without driving your audience absolutely crazy.
They just turn it off.
Right. But you can absolutely play a popular melody 5 times a day, and the audience will actually look forward to it.
So radio stations realized they had this massive, yawning, daily airspace to fill, and music was just the cheapest, most universally appealing spackle they could find to fill the cracks.
That's exactly what it was. And because music endures over time and acts directly on human emotion, this marriage of convenience became a permanent symbiotic relationship.
So we go from music being an afterthought to them being completely inseparable. But this transition is where the friction of the pre-radio era really puts things into perspective for me.
Oh, absolutely. The physical limitations before 1920 were severe.
Because before radio, experiencing music meant a massive expenditure of either time or money.
Yeah, if you wanted to hear a specific song in, say, 1910, you basically had three options. You could buy the printed sheet music, take it home, and play it yourself on a piano, assuming you even had a piano and knew how to play it.
Which is a big assumption.
Right. Or you could buy a physical wax cylinder or a heavy shellac record. But again, assuming you were wealthy enough to own a phonograph.
And those things were not cheap.
Not at all. And the third option was you pay an admission fee and travel to a live concert hall or a vaudeville theater.
So every single one of those options is tethered to the physical world. It's localized, it's individual, and you are paying for access every single time.
Every time.
And then, bam, radio drops this technological bomb on the entire economic structure of music.
It shattered it overnight. Because suddenly the song is traveling through the airwaves right into your living room simultaneously with thousands of other people, and the listener pays absolutely nothing for the privilege.
The source highlights this profound psychological shift that happened because of that. The concept of a cultural trend just accelerated exponentially.
Yes, the author notes a crucial distinction here, and it's one of my favorite points in the whole piece. They write, hit songs weren't sold music, but shared music.
Shared music. That completely reframes how we should think about the Billboard charts of the early 20th century. A hit wasn't just a ledger in a record store showing how many pieces of physical media sold.
No, the magic of the medium with the psychological impact of the simultaneity.
Right.
Imagine sitting in your living room in Philadelphia, hearing a specific trumpet solo, and knowing with absolute certainty that families in Boston and Baltimore and New York are experiencing the exact same note at the exact same millisecond.
That gives me chills, honestly.
It created a synchronized national culture where literally none had existed before. That shared experience elevated a simple piece of music into a mass social phenomenon.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, though, because somebody had to decide what that national culture was going to sound like. Which brings us to the rise of the DJ.
Ah, yes. Established around 1950. The source uses a great term here, calling DJs the invisible editors of music culture.
So a DJ wasn't just like a human jukebox.
No, the DJ was the curator.
Yeah.
They provided the vital context that unanchored music desperately needed. Before the disc jockey, a radio station might just play a totally random assortment of tracks.
It's just whatever they had lying around.
Exactly. But a skilled DJ sequenced them. They dictated the emotional arc of an hour by deciding the track order. They matched the tempo to the specific time of day.
And their commentary, too. Like what they said between the songs effectively instructed the listener on how they were supposed to feel about what they were hearing.
Precisely. They provided the framing.
I see them almost less as invisible editors and more like cartographers. Because by grouping specific sounds together, they were literally drawing borders around them and inventing genres.
That's a good point.
If you look at the origins of jazz or rock or soul or later hip-hop, these all began as hyper-localized regional cultures. They were confined to specific neighborhoods or clubs.
Sometimes just a few specific blocks in a single city.
Right, and it was the radio DJ who acted as the extraction mechanism. They pulled those local sounds out of the club, broadcast them to a wider audience, and codified them.
When an influential DJ consistently played a certain rough, guitar-heavy style of music in a dedicated time slot, the audience began to recognize that specific collection of sonic attributes as a distinct genre.
The invisible editor gave the music its boundaries.
They gave it a label and its cultural meaning.
Okay, so the audio fluid we talked about earlier is running the world at this point. It's birthing entire genres, synchronizing culture. But any medium that powerful eventually becomes a victim of its own infrastructure, right?
Inevitably.
So how does the vessel start crushing the water inside of it? Because radio lost its crown.
It lost it by enforcing rigid structural demands. We have to look at the mechanics of a broadcasting schedule. A radio station operates on a fixed, unforgiving grid of time.
The clock is God.
Exactly. The clock hour is typically divided into very specific segments. News at the top of the hour, station identification at the quarter hour, and mandatory commercial breaks at very specific minutes to satisfy the advertisers.
Because they're the ones funding the whole operation.
Right. And because that broadcast time was so rigid, the art form itself, the music, had to be physically molded to fit the container.
This goes right back to the 3-minute pop song we started with. Like if a musician writes a sprawling, beautiful 7-minute ballad,
That song is completely useless to a mid-century radio programmer. It blows up the entire grid. They can't fit their ad spots in.
So the song had to be standardized. They optimized the art for the broadcast format?
It's not just the total length either. Consider the ramp.
The ramp. What's that?
It's the instrumental intro of a song before the lead vocals begin. Those intros were engineered to be a specific length, often around 10 to 15 seconds.
Wait, let me guess. So the DJ had exactly enough time to talk over the music?
Yes. To introduce the track and hit the station's call letters right before the singer took a breath.
Oh, wow. That is wild.
And furthermore, the chorus generally had to hit within the first 45 seconds to hook the listener's attention before they got bored and turn the dial to a competing station.
So radio nurtured genres, but it also trapped them in these incredibly specific shapes. It forced music into this fixed, highly commercialized mold.
It absolutely did.
And while the music is stuck in this rigid radio mold, the ultimate usurper enters the living room. The cultural focal point shifts from the ear to the eye.
Yes, the visual takeover. It's starkly mapped out in the timeline. By the 1950s, television begins to aggressively replace the radio cabinet as the centerpiece of the American living room.
The auditory experience alone just wasn't enough anymore.
The audience demands visual spectacle. And this shift is ultimately cemented in 1981 with the launch of MTV.
I feel like saying video killed the radio star is almost too easy here, but I mean, it's structurally accurate.
It is entirely accurate regarding cultural dominance. The M&R column notes that post-1981, a song's commercial and cultural success became inextricably linked to its visual representation.
The music video.
Exactly. Radio fundamentally lost its throne as the primary discovery medium for new music. The power to dictate trends shifted from the DJ's voice to the director's lens.
So it sounds like radio went from being the main stage to becoming the waiting room.
That's a very fair assessment.
If audio is our fluid, it feels like it just got poured out of the main reservoir and relegated to the side puddles, but it doesn't evaporate. So what happened during this visual dark age? How did it survive?
It survived by retreating into spaces where the screen could not follow.
Oh, like cars.
Exactly. Hemmed in by television in the living room, and later by the early visual internet on desktop computers, radio became what the column calls background listening.
Right. It found a permanent survival niche in the dashboard of the commuting car. Or, playing quietly from a speaker on a warehouse shelf while people worked.
Or keeping a night shift worker company at 2 a.m. Because eyes demand absolute focus, but ears can multitask.
It became an audio experience that intentionally did not demand your full concentration.
Right. The music on the radio transitioned functionally into BGM background music. And the DJ commentary, which used to be so rich and contextual, was deliberately simplified.
They stopped being cartographers.
Yes. It became less challenging, less deep, more focused on brief, energetic bursts rather than long-form storytelling.
So radio sacrificed its massive cultural influence in exchange for deep, persistent penetration into our daily routines. It became the ambient soundtrack to modern life.
Exactly. Which sets the stage for the next great disruption.
Right, because we have radio stuck in the background playing simplified, molded music. The eye has seemingly won the war. But today, you and I are sitting here having a deep, engaging, long-form conversation on an on-demand audio platform.
And millions of people are spending hours a day immersed in podcasts.
So what breaks the broadcast mold? How do we get from BGM to this?
It was the dismantling of the physical and regulatory infrastructure. The timeline highlights two massive waves: the widespread consumer adoption of the internet around 1995 and the birth of the podcast format in 2005.
So the internet destroyed the old foundations of broadcasting.
Completely.
This is where we shift from public transit to the personal vehicle, right? Like, old radio was a public bus. It ran on a fixed schedule, on a fixed route, and everyone had to get on at the exact same time if they wanted to get to the destination.
Yes, and digital audio is the personal car. You don't need to apply to the government for a broadcast license. You don't need to spend millions building a transmission tower to fight for a specific frequency.
And crucially, you are no longer chained to a broadcasting clock.
Right. On-demand audio completely destroyed the necessity of simultaneity. The listener no longer has to tune in at 4:00 p.m. on a Tuesday to catch a specific interview.
The fluid completely sheds its physical container. But I actually want to push back on a specific dynamic here.
Oh, it?
So the text notes that podcasts reinvented audio as an individual-to-individual medium. But regarding music specifically, we have platforms like Spotify and Apple Music that handle the actual algorithmic delivery of songs now.
Right, streaming services.
Yeah. And the column argues that modern music podcasts don't exist simply to play tracks. So here is where it gets really interesting to me. If a music podcast isn't playing the music, hasn't audio just surrendered the utility of discovery entirely to the algorithm? What is the podcast actually doing?
Well, that is the exact division of labor that the internet created. The streaming algorithm handles the frictionless discovery and the playback of the audio file, but the podcast handles the context.
Ah, the context.
Because the music has been elevated from merely being a sound wave to being treated as a cultural text. Modern music podcasts focus on the history, the cultural background, the studio production choices.
And the intensely personal narratives associated with the albums, right?
Exactly. As the author states, music is no longer just played, it's talked about.
So instead of a DJ talking for 12 seconds over an intro ramp so they can hit the vocals on time, you have two hosts spending 3 hours dissecting the cultural impact of a single album from 1998.
Analyzing the lyrics, debating the mixing techniques, it is a massive historical callback.
Wait, how so?
Because this modern format is actually a direct reconstruction of that 1950s golden age DJ culture. The DJ as the curator and context provider has returned.
Oh, wow, yeah, but just in a different container.
Exactly. Because this new format is on-demand, digital, and completely free from the broadcast clock, it can be intimately private, highly niche, and incredibly long form.
Even if the track itself isn't played in the podcast because of, modern copyright restrictions, the culture of that music is fiercely kept alive through the depth of the conversation.
It's a beautiful full circle moment for the medium.
It really is. It's beautiful to think about audio returning to its deep roots. But let's look at the plumbing again,
Let's do it.
because none of this happens without a mechanism to fund it. If we are returning to deep, rich, niche cultural conversations, how does this new era survive economically?
Right, the economics.
Because a 3-hour podcast analyzing a 1990s shoegaze band is never going to pour to millions of concurrent listeners that a traditional morning radio show would. So how do they pay for the microphones?
To understand the modern solution, we have to examine the inherent flaw of the old broadcast advertising model. Traditional terrestrial radio was entirely dependent on a single, blunt metric.
Mass ratings.
Mass ratings and reach. The larger the total audience you can prove you were reaching, the higher your CPMA, your cost per thousand listeners, and the more you could charge an advertiser.
Which mechanically forces the radio station to appeal to the lowest common denominator.
Exactly.
If your only goal is mass scale, you can't play a strange, experimental 8-minute jazz track because half the audience will just tune out. Your ratings drop and you lose your ad revenue.
You have to sand down all the edges. You play the safe 3-minute pop song that nobody absolutely loves, but more importantly, that nobody actively hates enough to change the dial.
Wow. So the old advertising structure literally restricted the breadth of culture that was allowed to exist on the airwaves. It was optimized for scale, not depth.
But the podcast era completely upends that math. The source points to a crucial window between the expansion of listener support platforms around 2015 and a massive cultural reevaluation of audio in 2020, where a multi-layered economic structure emerged.
We move away from needing one giant toothpaste sponsor to cover the cost of the whole tower.
Yes. Instead, we see creators utilizing a complex blend of revenue streams: ads, direct support, merch, live events.
And this diversity of income means a creator doesn't need a million casual listeners to survive anymore. They can maintain total creative independence and thrive with an audience of just a few thousand deeply engaged, passionate listeners.
And the mechanics of the ads themselves even changed. The column specifically highlights the power of the host read ad.
Oh, yeah, like when we do our reads.
Exactly. When an audio creator pauses their deep dive analysis and personally reads a sponsorship message, the psychology of that moment is fundamentally different from a jarring, pre-recorded, generic commercial interrupting a radio broadcast.
Because it's not some booming radio voice shouting at you.
Right. The difference lies entirely in the context of consumption. When a listener hears a host-read ad, they aren't necessarily buying the product based on its inherent merits.
They're buying their trust in the speaker.
Exactly. The creator has spent dozens, maybe hundreds of hours in the listener's ear, providing value, sharing vulnerabilities, building a parasocial relationship.
So the advertising in this space is no longer just about capturing raw attention. It relies on trust, as the actual medium of exchange.
Trust is the new currency.
Which brings this directly to you, the person listening to this audio right now. The text makes an incredibly poignant observation about the mechanic of direct listener support.
It does.
When you subscribe to a paid feed or support a creator on a platform, it is not merely a transaction. You aren't just paying a fee to unlock an MP3 file. The author defines it as participatory culture.
It is an active investment in the existence of a community. By supporting a niche show, you are voting with your wallet to ensure that the physical and digital space for that specific cultural conversation continues to exist in the world.
We have transitioned from a broadcast era where sheer massive scale was the only metric that mattered to an era where the depth of the relationship is the most valuable economic asset.
The intimacy of the medium, that feeling of someone being inside your head while you go about your day, has transitioned from being a quirky byproduct of the technology into its foundational economic pillar.
It's just an incredible trajectory when you lay it all out like that.
It really is. The historical timeline of audio, from the first spoken word broadcasts in 1920 to the multi-layered hyper-niche podcast economy of 2026, proves that this is not a story of a medium dying.
It's the story of a medium constantly morphing to protect the intimate connection between the speaker and the listener.
Audio survived the television, it survived the visual internet, and it did so by shedding its mass-market armor and remembering that its true superpower was always intimate, trust-based storytelling.
Which leads me to a final, somewhat unsettling thought I want to leave you with today.
Uh-oh.
Well, think about it. We spent the first half of this deep dive establishing that in the golden age of radio, a hit song was defined by millions of people sharing the exact same piece of music simultaneously.
Right, the mass synchronization that created a unified national culture.
Exactly. But now, thanks to the digital liberation we just outlined, we are operating in an era where audio is fundamentally about niche, trust-based communities and hyper-personal, fragmented listening habits.
Yeah, everyone's in their own lane.
So if the very definition of a hit song used to mean music that millions of people shared simultaneously over the radio, what happens to the very concept of a global hit moving forward?
That is a fascinating question.
If we are all retreating into our own beautifully curated, highly specific, algorithmic audio bubbles, will we ever experience those massive, culturally unifying musical moments again? Or is the future of shared culture destined to be entirely local, heavily fragmented, and deeply personal, leaving us without a shared soundtrack at all?
Wow. That's a lot to chew on.
Something to mull over next time you curate your queue for the commute, you know? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring the audio spaces that you love because in this new economy, they literally only exist because you are a part of them.